although lots of people in my community quite enjoy it. I could speak to you for a month on this topic and get very passionate about it. But I'm going to try and really keep it quite focused on ADHD and hormones, on specific hormones. But this relates to all women, the impact our hormones have on our mood and our mental health in general. And I believe that if we weren't operating within misogynistic medical systems, we would see quite a different response to how women's mental health is managed and would have been historically. And I truly believe that in most cases, when you support a woman to regulate her hormones, you have a profound effect on her emotional and mental health. But I'm not going to go on a feminist rampage. I'm going to keep it really specific to looking at our hormones and ADHD. And I came into this work because I was diagnosed. I run a women's health clinic, it's international. I have an online one and an in person one that I run with a specialist GP. So when I received my diagnosis a few years ago, I went straight to the research. As you said, I bridge the sacred and the science. So I want to know the data. I want to see what's happening. And I was furious that there was really nothing telling me about the impact my hormones had on my traits. And yet I knew the relationship between hormones and neurotransmitters was huge. So I embarked on a journey to begin to fill that void for neurodivergent women. And recently, actually earlier this year, completed my own study into peri-menopause and ADHD. And that's free as a download off my website, and I won't go into a lot of detail about that. But that's the kind of context within which I work, and I'm very passionate about empowering women with this knowledge around their bodies. So hopefully, whether you're neurodivergent or not, there's going to be information that is useful to you today. So I'm not going to go into any detail about what is ADHD, what do we think is caused. For the purposes of this, ADHD is believed to have be linked to neurotransmitters. Mostly dopamine and serotonin are the ones that get a lot of airtime. Um, and this is really important when we're looking at a woman's brain. These are the parts of the brain that we know are covered in estrogen and progesterone receptors. And if a cell has a hormone receptor on it, it means it depends on that hormone to do its job properly. Not only does it depend on the correct levels, but the right ratios. And this is really important, particularly when we're talking about estrogen and progesterone. So this would make sense that when we're seeing the parts of the brain that affect cognitive function and executive function, which is the issue in ADHD, no wonder the hormones have such a big impact. And what I'm going to do now is really start to go into the correlation between specific hormones and neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitters are dopamine, which is our motivation, our reward, our drive, our focus, that real like mojo, get up and go neurotransmitters, which is a problem for us. Serotonin, which is mood calmer when it's working properly, and it's considered to be the contentment neurotransmitter. Another one is glutamate. This one gets much less airtime, but is really important, particularly for those of us with sensitive nervous systems or a history of trauma. And it plays a role in alertness and memory and focus, but too much of it can have quite the opposite effect and be very detrimental to our mental health. On the flip side of that, we have GABA, which is the real sort of calm, restorative, helps the brain to really calm down neurotransmitter. And also one that I work with a lot in my clinic is histamine. So it's not just an inflammatory mediator, it also acts as a neurotransmitter around alertness and arousal, energy. But again, when it becomes out of balance, it can have a detrimental impact on our mood. And we know that ADHD people are much more likely to have histamine intolerant issues. So having an understanding that it's not just about dopamine and serotonin, it's all these, there's other ones, but these are the ones that I'm really going to focus on today, and all of these are impacting how we're able to function. So estrogen and progesterone. Progesterone, for full transparency, is my absolute favorite hormone on the planet. She doesn't get the airtime that she needs. But a lot of hormone influencers and wellness influencers and doctors are starting to now talk about ADHD and hormones, which one part of me is absolutely elated that, having beaten this drum for years, it's now starting to come into the conversation. However, a lot of the information is quite basic and offers misinformed and what can be quite harmful approaches. And this is primarily around estrogen, because we know that estrogen sensitizes dopamine and serotonin. So when estrogen is behaving herself in the body, it makes dopamine and serotonin work better. So it means that this can really be quite a sweet spot in the cycle. When estrogen has risen here, this can be quite a sweet spot for ADHD women, assuming there isn't a histamine issue and assuming we are methylating and processing that estrogen properly. And if we aren't doing that, adding more estrogen in as, oh, if we put some estrogen in the body, everything will be okay, could actually add fuel to the fire. She's the party girl of the hormone world, estrogen. So when she's regulated, we can feel good. But when she's not where we want her to be, she can really make us feel quite awful. I certainly see estrogen, something called estrogen dominance, related to PMDD, PMS, and significant mood dysregulation. So estrogen really is not the answer. She is the last hormone I would consider working with an ADHD woman around. The other thing that she does, apart from feeding histamine, is also stimulating glutamate. So if we have this profile that we put estrogen in because we think it's going to sensitize the dopamine and serotonin, if there's a histamine issue there and this sensitive nervous system, what we could do is actually really exacerbate any mental health issues. I see women who are having suicidal ideation. They feel awful. They can't get out of bed. Their mood is completely dysregulated. And this is the estrogen. And they'll say to me, but I was told the estrogen would make me feel better. Well, it's not going to do that if this glutamate and histamine is an issue. However, on the flip side, progesterone is the hormone that really gets a lot of bad airtime. There is a lot of misunderstanding about her, and I'm not going to go into why I think that is for time's sake today. But progesterone is a massively misunderstood hormone, and lots of women think they're intolerant or sensitive. And I would suggest that whilst it is a very real experience for women who take it, it's not actually progesterone that's the problem, but usually the dosage, in that we are currently very outdated in our medical models of progesterone. And when we get progesterone right, it's life-changing for women. And what progesterone does is sensitize GABA, this relaxing, calming element. And what we can see is that when a woman is naturally menstruating, she is always producing more progesterone than estrogen. And outdated images show these in equal amounts, that we have this rise in estrogen here and then this rise in progesterone, and it's very inaccurate. We produce tons of progesterone, which is really important for us because progesterone is a mood stabilizer and a nervous system regulator. When progesterone begins to ship out in our late 30s into our early 40s, because we're not ovulating every month in peri-menopause, which is natural and normal and what we should be doing, that progesterone drops off and we then lose that mood stabilization benefit. And this is a really common time for ADHD women to get diagnosed. And I believe it's because of progesterone deficiency. We lose the progesterone, we don't have that support for our nervous system and our mood stabilization. That then leaves estrogen unopposed, which then has more weight to feed the histamine and the glutamate. And quite, as I call my study, it's the perfect storm. So progesterone, when dosed properly in the right vehicle of delivery for a woman's body, can be an absolute game changer. And she actually has properties that calm antihistamine as well. So just from looking here, hopefully it's starting to see how significant this hormonal fluctuation is for us. We're 10 times more likely to have PMDD than neurotypical women. We're much more likely to have postnatal depression. Evidence shows that we have a significantly more challenging perimenopause. And I believe a lot of it is to do with the ratios of these two hormones and how sensitive our nervous systems are. So the other thing to note on this as well is that the lack of research into women is stark. The medical bias, the gap that we have in research around women is stark in ADHD. Lots of what we know to be true is based on naughty little white boys and is not very helpful to the rest of us. As a result, we have a lot of medications that we have decades of testing on a male physiology, but not on a female one. And with the surge of the number of women being diagnosed recently, it became very clear, and we've got one study to support this, that estrogen and progesterone have a significant impact on the effectiveness of medication, with estrogen sensitizing it and progesterone dulling it down. So we're really seeing the power of these hormonal fluctuations. And one of the things I get women to do is to track their traits when they're regularly menstruating, track their traits against their hormonal fluctuations. And the best way to support a neurodivergent woman to do this is with a pen and paper and a visual image. If we put it on an app, if we can't see it, it doesn't exist. So we'll either forget to record it, but if we've got a pen and paper by the bed and we put a cross in the box where that was an issue, we have this really clear visual map of where inattentive and hyperactive traits flare up. And the most recent study that was done that actually for the first time creates a hormonal model around ADHD was last year. And they show here to be much more likely to have a flare up of hyperactive traits, so greater risk taking, positive aggression, substance misuse, and here to be a flare up of inattentive traits. So it's really interesting to empower a woman to look at this, to see the impact this ebb and flow has throughout the month. And if nothing else, it's incredibly validating to go, oh my gosh, this isn't me. I'm not going crazy. That's the impact of this very real hormonal fluctuation on my ability to navigate my traits. And then you can use that data through menstrual cycle awareness to start to create an ADHD-friendly lifestyle around their traits. So I'm going to leave estrogen and progesterone there because, as you could tell, I could talk about those all day. And then we move on to prolactin. So prolactin is actually one that really doesn't get spoken about a lot. It's a hormone made in the pituitary gland, and its release is normally inhibited by dopamine. So if dopamine is low, which we tend to see as a key factor in ADHD, that means that prolactin levels can creep up. So low dopamine equals higher prolactin. High prolactin means lower dopamine. So they get into this feedback loop with each other. So it's a bit of a chicken egg scenario. And prolactin is often associated with breastfeeding. That's the hormone that goes high then. But actually, what we've seen in more recent years is it's becoming significantly higher in all women. And I suspect this is due to chronic stress, and the HPA axis dysregulation of the stress response is just driving this prolactin up, and it's wreaking havoc in the background in terms of the HPO axis, which is how the brain's communicating with the ovaries around ovulation. SSRIs and antipsychotics can also cause prolactin to go up, as can estrogen dominance. So again, we're looking at that. They're all interrelated. You cannot just go in on one hormone when you're working with a woman. It's a system. Hormone imbalances don't exist in a vacuum. They have to be worked with all together in relationship to each other. But it can have a really big impact on ADHD symptoms. So one of the things we want to look at in the bloods, what's happening with prolactin? Is this sort of one of those things that could get missed, that could be contributing to brain fog, emotional sensitivity, particularly around rejection sensitivity dysphoria, low libido, sleep disruption, fatigue, and just that loss of drive, really. So particularly if you're seeing women who are burnt out, I would be looking at prolactin. Then thyroid. Again, I clinically see ADHD women are much more prone to having imbalances in their thyroid. And, no wonder when we see the direct relationship between adrenal function and thyroid function, no wonder we're much more prone to having this imbalance. But the thyroid hormones play a crucial role in brain development in utero and in early childhood. And it was thought that disruptions in these hormones in women may lead to a higher risk of things like ADHD and autism. But in relation specifically to dopamine, having low thyroid, so like hypothyroid type experience, slows down dopamine transition. So as we know, dopamine is thought to be one of the key players in ADHD. So if thyroid function is low, it's likely that your dopamine system is going to be a bit sluggish. So this is going to exacerbate traits. So it's really important that we're doing full panel thyroid tests on women, not just looking at TSH, but we're looking at all of the thyroid hormones, because hypothyroidism can show up a bit like ADHD in terms of the more inattentive stuff. So we want to have a look at what's happening there to really support it. And there's a couple of studies that may be of interest to you around that. Then testosterone, she's definitely getting a lot more airtime at the moment and is one of the ones that I'm just feeling a little bit like, oh, let's just be careful with her. Love testosterone. And clinically, I tend to see ADHD women having higher levels of blood serum testosterone than I see neurotypical. I've never studied that. It's just an observation I tend to see. Um, but there's no research, unsurprisingly, into this about specifically around ADHD, but we know that testosterone plays a big role in sensitizing dopamine, and plays a big role with motivation, decision making, risk taking, energy, drive, these kinds of things. Really big role in cognitive function and mood. So there can be this tendency at the moment. Testosterone is kind of the new estrogen when it's being touted to support ADHD. I would be very gentle with this approach, because if that woman doesn't need testosterone or has a preference for methylating it through the liver in a way that kind of turns it into testosterone on steroids, you could really exacerbate things like anger, rage, mood dysregulation. So it really isn't, again, like the rest of them, let's slap a bit of this on and hope it's okay. We really want to look at them all together and see what this woman's unique experience is. But, there is definitely this link around optimizing testosterone. So, like I say, I could talk to you all day. How am I doing for time? I'm good. Okay. So, for those of you that are interested, these are the most useful studies in relation to women's hormones. I mean, look, this is what we're dealing with. 2024, 2023. I mean, finally, I think the memo has gone out that we need some more research into ADHD women. But it's just really, for me, they're validating what women's lived experiences have always been. I love the science, but what matters to me is what the quality of a woman's life and what her lived experience is. And the science can catch up with us eventually when we get there. But it's just to show, finally, there are some pieces of research to come out to validate our experience. And then here, this is just my interpretation of this piece of data. And it's showing the cycle with where the sensitive parts were seen. And in their study, I actually spoke with the lead professor on this study. He was great, but they acknowledged it was very estrogen focused, again, like all these studies tend to be. And what they put these increased, more vulnerable parts of the cycle down to were estrogen withdrawal. I would say it's more complex than that, but I think it gives us, a starting point of really putting hormones into the model for how we manage women's ADHD. I do not think anyone should be assessing, coaching, supporting ADHD women without having a conversation about hormones. You don't have to be a hormone expert. Just saying to a woman, track what's going on and let's see if there's a pattern. You don't need to know if it's estrogen or progesterone. If you can see that in certain phases of her cycle, the inattentive traits are through the roof, you can support her to look at her diary and say, well, let's block that week out in terms of socializing or having to focus on things or whatever the trait is in that space. So it's a really powerful thing to do, and you don't have to have loads of knowledge to do it. But I just think that visual is quite useful. And there again, I'm banging on about tracking again. This is the tracker that I actually use in my clinic. I've got an inattentive one and a hyperactive one because it can be quite useful to really see the differences on that. And then women can adjust anything down here that they want to add in. And then just in terms of the life seasons, just to put this into perspective, I'm sure those of you that have been through peri-menopause or in it are going to be able to relate to the chaos that this can look like. When we're in our 20s and 30s, we're generally, assuming everything's working as it should, have consistently good levels of estrogen and progesterone. Then from our mid to late 30s, we drop into phase 1 of peri-menopause, which is where we see this progesterone come off. And this is a highly vulnerable time for ADHD women who may have spent their life knowing something wasn't quite right, being misdiagnosed, misprescribed. Suddenly the lid comes off and it's like, oh, it's ADHD. And I firmly believe it's this reduction in progesterone because estrogen tends to stay quite high and consistent here until we then transition into phase 2, where estrogen starts to drop and we come through the other side post-menopause. But during this time, women will experience the highest levels of estrogen they've ever had in their life and the lowest levels. And if we're adding histamine and glutamate issues into that without the support of progesterone, it's going to be a really wild time for ADHD women, and they need lots of support. And what I see clinically tends to be a really supportive model of care where women thrive in most situations is putting in a really good body identical, not synthetic, but body identical natural progesterone here, regulating the blood sugar, optimizing the nervous system, and through an ADHD lens. And that seems to work really well for a lot of my women. And again, just to show here, rather than having that estrogen high and then the progesterone, this is what's happening in perimenopause, where that progesterone drops off. We might still be having regular periods here. So unless a woman's actively tracking her ovulation, might not know this, but what I would expect to see with a woman's mental health here is her bandwidth has significantly reduced, her capacity, starting to worry about things she never used to worry about. Quite often I have women saying to me, in my car and I travel into London and wouldn't think twice about it. And now I'm worrying about whether there's a car park at the restaurant I'm going to at 6 p.m. Right? This is progesterone deficiency. It's an inner scratchiness, inner irritability, and really difficult to connect in with the joy of things, not because you're depressed, not because you're low, but everything kind of feels like a bit of a to-do list. And this is usually what's happening with the hormones when a woman's having that experience. I'm not going to talk about that. And then just the final piece that I'm going to share here is that these are the guys, the girls that get lots of airtime when it comes to looking at hormones. But actually, when it comes to how the body prioritizes hormone production, they're at the bottom of the pecking order. If you don't produce these hormones, you're going to feel like crap, but you're not going to die. Okay. Whereas with these, very quickly, if we ran out of these, we're not going to be hanging around for very long. So the body will prioritize production of these hormones to make sure that you function optimally. And quite often in clinic, yes, it's really important to have a look at what's happening here. But once we really address this through somatics, nervous system regulation, blood sugar regulation, through diet and lifestyle, about 75% of symptoms go. We know that ADHD people are many more times likely to have type 2 diabetes. So this is really powerful to regulate in terms of mood, energy, sleep, and of course, nervous system dysregulation. I don't think we generally know what it feels like to be actually relaxed. We have a very high threshold for stress. And I think that's just how our nervous systems are wired. So it's really putting in non-negotiable support here. So I'm going to draw it to an end there. I hope that has been useful in beginning to just show the importance of the hormones, the neurotransmitters. And as I say, yes, I focused on ADHD, but this is relevant to all women. So I hope that helped.
Thank you so much, Adele. That was super informative, and I understand many more things about myself, the way my body functions, especially the relaxation for sure. I realized that I actually don't know how to go on holiday, even though I meditate a lot and I know how to regulate my nervous system, but to actually have a holiday where I do nothing is very, very difficult.
It is. Doing nothing is not our forte, and neither is consistency.
No, yes, that's the other one I really struggle with. What I love is really understanding that it is about balance, really looking at the entire, living system, which is a holistic approach. And as we look at nature continuously just seeks balance. And so really to just find that within ourselves. And I was wondering if anybody else has any questions for Adele at this point. We'll open up questions and answers also later. Rajni, please go ahead.
Thank you, Eleftheria, and thank you so much, Adela, for this truly insightful presentation. And in fact, in recent times, I have observed a trend which is growing very fast, and that is the indiscriminate use of this term ADHD. In a way, it is being trivialized and it is being downplayed, by using that term for anything a little serious, or somebody is not able to focus, like people say, oh, I'm so ADHD today, or I can't focus, must be my ADHD. So people are downplaying the seriousness of this issue, one. And even I have seen that, people often assume that they have ADHD, whereas the reality is they don't have ADHD. So in your day-to-day life, when you meet people who assume that, they have a tendency to kind of self-diagnose themselves and assuming that they have ADHD, how many people, what percentage of people you see in your day-to-day life who come for the consultation and they assume that they have ADHD, but they actually don't have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't think we would know the exact data on that. So, firstly, to speak to your first comment, and I'll try to get my ADHD to remember both questions. If I don't, just remind me. But the first comment, yes, it has become used very flippantly. And I think there's nothing more harmful you can say to an ADHD person. "I've got ADHD, I do that," right? It is so invalidating, particularly if, and I only deal with women, so I can only speak from that bias, particularly when that woman will have been down rabbit holes, probably had to advocate relentlessly, fight a system to be heard and seen, to then be instantly dismissed by someone who's supposed to love and care about her is so invalidating and harmful, I can't tell you. But what I say to people when they're like, "Oh, well, I do that," I say, well, we all go for a wee every single day. But when you're going 20 times an hour, it's a problem. When that is disrupting and affecting your quality of life, of being able to sustain a job, of being remembering to pick your children up, of being able to maintain relationships where people feel nourished by you. We literally forget people exist. That's really horrible to be on the receiving end of, right? So these are really problematic elements for us. I couldn't do my work unless I had a PA. I'm a highly intelligent woman. I've got a high IQ. I'm very academic. I'm intelligent. You asked me to try and plan a clinic, it would send me over the edge. Without my PA doing that, I couldn't show up and do what I want. It's problematic. So it's that shift. Everyone can relate to those things happening at some point. But when it's your lived experience, second by second by second by second, it's a problem. And actually, we don't have a problem focusing. We just have to be really interested in something. Otherwise, we're bored and we check out. But if we're focused, I could not eat, drink, tend to my children for 8 hours if I'm focused on something I'm interested in. So I think there's that element there. In terms of the number of people who are self-diagnosed, I think this is a really tricky one because lots of people have had to get self-diagnosed because they felt invalidated, not heard, and they've had to go through that. And then they go, I don't want to be medicated. So what's the point of getting out? I've got this far. So my approach is if a woman comes to me and says, I'm pretty sure I've got ADHD, most women have massive imposter syndrome about it. Even at the point of diagnosis, they're like, oh, it's okay. No one's waking up and going, I think I'm going to get my and which is this perception. So I think there's a large number who are self-diagnosed, but I also think from my work there's a lot of women with hormone imbalances that show up very similarly to ADHD traits. So women are going, oh my gosh, this makes sense to me, this is what's going on, but actually what was your childhood experience? Has this been your lifelong lived experience, and is there something else going on?
Mhm. Thank you so much.